Okay, you should be all set.
Okay, sounds good. So welcome back for week 8 of implementing SPARC and TRAC on your campus. So this is what I would consider a catch-up time in terms of the process as we're going through. I'm going to just state real quickly that I have had some internet issues the last couple of days with bandwidth, so I'm hoping we're going to be able to get through this without glitches, but Lisa will communicate back to me via my phone if we get um, totally paused in all of this. So this is gonna be another one of these weeks where I'm gonna take you through the slides. We're gonna talk about the bits and pieces of all of this, and then we'll go into articulate storyline and look at what all of those micro skills are. So like you said, originally when I was designing this book, I was thinking in a month by month thing. So at month 8, we'd be wanting to catch up on any content edits and additions. So hopefully all your videos are in at this point, most of your text is in. But my own experience with doing this stuff, there's always like a handful of little things that are just kind of out there that, like, I don't know, like in my brain, I think of it as like you kind of keep circling. These are the things that you wake up in the middle of the night, you're like, oh yeah, I got to do this. And it never makes it officially on a list. So this is the point when you're going to want to sit down and go slide by slide and be like, what am I missing? What hasn't been content checked? Because we're getting to the point now where it's not that you can't continue to do edits, but the edits are going to, once you get into like a publishing space and uploading things, anytime you catch a mistake, then it means, and this is what I went through the first year I launched SPARC on my own campus, was that you find a mistake, then you have to come back to the articulate, fix the mistake, test the mistake and articulate, publish it, upload it to your LMS, test it there, and then make it live for students. So fixing one small error is suddenly a 1-hour long task. So this is really like where you want to test, process, plan. You know, it's going to take a lot less time at the point. And these are places also where I've engaged the use of my son, where he'll just kind of have his headphones on and doing whatever, and he knows to kind of just click the next button, and we can test a lot of stuff that way. This is also the point when we got to talk about how are people navigating from slide to slide, because sometimes it's a next slide, sometimes it's a next layer, sometimes it's a hide a layer. Sometimes when I first built this class, there were a few places where students could navigate through the slides, like there was 4 chunks, but they could choose which order they did them in. And so how did I do that? And ultimately I'll share with you why I removed all of that. We talked about triggers once before, but we're going to go back into that trigger panel and look at what that looks like from a navigation standpoint. We're going to talk quickly today about capturing audio. I do have a couple of places where I just used audio to enhance the reading so it slows down. Like, so I'm trying to think where we did this originally, but I think it was like one of those places where we really want to talk about amnesty policy, or a point that we really wanted to highlight. We didn't have a person come in and videotape that, but you can, just the way we looked at last week, you can video right into Articulate. You can also record audio directly into Articulate. And I think we're in a shifted paradigm now where most of us have videos and microphones that are capable of capturing all of that stuff. So we do have more skills and tools and use of combining all of those things. We're going to talk about fine tuning the layout, because a lot of times we're just kind of getting stuff in there, you know, playing around with how things are, you know, placed out on that slide. But if you have slides that are similar in layout, if they're a little bit off as a student is clicking through, you're going to see that little jostle. It jumps from side to side, almost like a very jaunty little animation. So how do we make sure that everything's in exactly the same place on every slide? And then we're going to talk quick about like the pre-published testing of slides and scenes. So just a quick recap, this is based on this technical manual that's downloadable at this link. Lisa also put it in the chat box. You can also use this little bit.ly if you don't already have it. So catching up on content, and I think this is really the point, and I've already made this point, is that it's not that you can't make edits later on, and odds are good you're going to find something no matter what. It seems like no matter what you do, there's always going to be one thing that misfires once you've got students in the system. Or I think for me, a lot of it in the early years of using this on my campus is that I assume that the majority of students would get through, but inevitably would find places where enough students would get stuck and something that would result in an email that I had to deal with, that it ultimately led me to change the design just to, you know, because at some point, even if it eliminates 10 emails, like that's totally worth it. And, you know, the share of time of like, do I want 10 to 20 emails or do I want to take the hour to fix it? And I personally kind of land on the side of I would rather take the hour to fix it than to have to deal with those 10 to 20 emails. So in terms of navigation, Articulate offers like all of these opportunities that you don't necessarily have to go through content in a straight line. You can provide some flexibility. I think we're in a space where there's a balance here because we are presenting a lot of mandated content. Not all of the content's mandated. Some of this content just might be stuff that philosophically fits in with your mission as a college, as a campus, within the way you present content about your program in general, that it makes sense to include. But for the most part, if you're coming to SPARC, odds are good you're going to use it to deliver at least some amount of mandated content. So I think that does at some point alter how we want students to navigate through the course. We want to make sure that they watch the entire slide. We want to make it so that when the video ends, I mean, one of the choices you could do, you could add a trigger where at the end of the video, it could automatically advance to the next slide and potentially start the next video. But if that student has walked away from their computer, do we want a whole module to play when they're not physically present? So I think there are those places where, you know, I look at it as you have to have some road bumps in there, or what do you call it, like speed bumps. Like my local grocery store has speed bumps. It does slow you down. It does make you pay attention to what's going on around you. And I kind of think of this as, you know, psychological little e-learning speed bumps. And like I said, the lesson learned for me is that I went through 3 years of letting students navigate at one point in module 2 and at one point in module 3, how they wanted to ultimately, what order they wanted to consume the content in. But I almost always had, like, those were the slides that I had the most questions about. And one of the things I've learned along the way is asking students to take a screenshot when they're struggling with something, because a lot of times just looking at the screen, they're missing something that you see as obvious, and it's a matter of explaining, like, no, you have to click on this button. Like that tab return thing that we talked about last week, sometimes that saves the day because for whatever reason their mouse won't click on something, but you can tell them to start clicking on their tab button until they see the square go around, like for say the next button. So I think each year I've kind of gone back and said, okay, well, here's where I've had the most emails that were really unnecessary emails. And so ultimately last year I did decide to remove those multiple navigation route slides out. And so students now go in a very streamlined, like you start it, everybody goes from slide 1 to slide 20 in the same order. And it was totally worth it in terms of the not having those emails. And I do have a small Microsoft form that I use to gather content from students. And I don't feel like I got any negative feedback related to the fact that there was no more kind of choice navigation through. So my advice, and this, I guess this is one of those things, like for me, I'm generally unrolling this program to 1,800 incoming students, 18 to 1,900. So even if it's only going to affect 1% of students, it's a large enough number of students that it makes sense. So when in doubt, go the simple route. I think that it's, you know, it's worth it in the long run for, you know, because my guess is that a lot of you are looking at this and you are going to be like the person in my seat where you've developed all of it and you're going to oversee all of it, or you're going to be the leader in overseeing it. So let's make your life easy on the back end of once this program's deployed. So in terms of navigation, and I think these are things that we do automatically. I think there's a couple of, like, UX is user design, and you know, there's a couple of like little terms that they use in design technology to talk about like how intrinsically understandable are things. And for most of us, forward and backwards buttons are there. I mean, I think if you see a triangle that points to the right, we know that that's a play button. Now, if we see a square, we know that that's a stop button. Like those are all things that we've learned and consumed as part of our culture as symbols of importance. Like the little X, like we know that that's a close button. We automatically look to that top right corner for that little X button. I've noticed that pop-up ads will often put that close button on the left or in a lower corner because it's not our first place to look for it. So they're slowing us down with those little microseconds of having to look for that X. So those are all things that we can assume that our users are going to notice and use, because that's the language of the culture that we live in. So forward and backward in my mind is jumping to a slide, and I like to indicate specifically which slide I want the slide to go to. Articulate will automatically put a next button to the next slide, but sometimes you don't create your slides in order. So it just, again, it's one of those places where can we eliminate possible breakdowns and having to redo things. So I think for me, when I'm building my triggers, I'm jumping to a slide and I'm specifying that slide. The other thing there is that if you need to change things later, then you've got a really specific list and you can go in and fix those things, and maybe you reorder stuff, and you don't have to worry about changing the slide layout. You just change which slide you want to jump to. And then showing and hiding layers. So layers are those little bits of pieces that go kind of above a slide and build up, but the way we navigate through that, I kind of think of it as like a bridge, where it's kind of this little arch that we go up and over to get to the next slide, as opposed to kind of the direct route. So we have to do triggers that show and hide layers, and to a student, it all looks the same on the back end. You're revealing new content in a specific order. The other controls that we can talk about are the player controls. So the player being that frame that goes around it, and the player will automatically have a next and a previous button built into it. And I have turned those ones off, and I've removed those buttons because Articulate will let people just move through. And again, because it's mandated content, I don't want students to have that access to anything automated. Like, I want to control everything. Like, after they do this, they're going to do this, and there's no other option. Like, we're going to move them through, and that's very specific view. So we're going to look at the story view control panel. I think we maybe visited that once, but let's talk about it from this perspective. We're going to talk about text narrations today. So like I said, it's very similar. We can bring in a pre-recorded audio file. We can record with the mic. We get an audio editor. We can add captioning in the same way that we added captioning to the video editor. And it creates an icon to the lower left of the slide, which serves as a visual object. So when you're creating your slide and building your slide and kind of working around with it, you have a visual cue that that audio does exist in there. Because with the video, like, we have like a screenshot that we can see and play with, but with the sound stuff, you don't get that same thing. So we'll just point that out. And then we're going to talk about the fine tuning of the layout. If you've played around with photos of programs, you'll maybe be familiar with rulers and guidelines and guides. And I think the way those work, I think, is a little bit individual. So we're going to show you all of those today, and you can figure out what works best for you. I can share, I'll share with you my system of going through things. And then size and position, which allows us to really get into like the real fine tuning adjustments. And that's what's going to make it so that the objects don't jump from point to point to point. And then we're also going to talk about the slide timeline adjustments. And the timeline is that part at the bottom of the screen. And sometimes they end up really long, and it's just a static slide. And while it doesn't necessarily matter how long the timeline is on some things, Articulate will do some calculations of how long it would take somebody to get through the program. And sometimes you want that data, and it's good for that to be accurate. So we're going to talk about how to, and these are, like, again, these are really the fine tunings as we're getting ready to publish. We're getting towards the end of doing the content portion. And now we're going to be talking about, over the next couple of weeks, how do you get this into your LMS? How do you get it launched to students? And then what happens once you have made it live to students, and what your life is going to look like. And then the preview part, and I'll talk to you about my process, about how I work through previewing stuff to make sure I have captured as many errors as I possibly can while I'm still working in Articulate before I start moving into the LMS process. So I'm going to switch my screens now. We're going to go over to Articulate. I'm going to bring here so I don't forget anything. So when we're in story view, we actually have a bird's eye view of what navigation is going to look like through the program. The little red flag here tells me what scene my student is going to start in. And there's these little arrows that show when I'm on this slide, I'm going to go to this slide. And if I click on any one of these, I can see that it changes to red. Actually, I can zoom in by clicking down here. so we can see the navigation. And this is actually a really simple way to make sure your navigation is all in place. Like this slide can only go to this slide can only go forward to this slide. There's no back button here, and I can tell that because there's a red arrow going here, but no red arrow going back. Once I'm here though, I begin to say, okay, I have a back button and I have a forward button that all work. And this would be a really quick way to be like, oh my God, oh, that arrow's missing. Sometimes you'll have an arrow that's extraneous and going, they'll come back and over to this way, or like this view can look like a tree sometimes, and it's very muddled. I have a articulate file that I built that's basically a bingo board, and so it's a very different story view, because this one is a very vertical column kind of a thing, and that one is more 2 rows. Like the first row is literally just the bingo board as you would envision a bingo board, and then the 25 squares that make up the bingo board buttons are just one big long horizontal line. So I have to utilize scroll bars to move up and down. So there's, once I zoomed in, I have this vertical scroll bar, and if you build out wide, you'll also get a horizontal scroll bar. The other thing that you get, and actually my Zoom window is on top of this, over here, these are where the automatic properties come in. So as I click on these slides, none of these boxes are checked. You can also, I'm going to Control A and highlight all of the slides in this scene, and none of these are on. But if I come over here, let's just add a slide to this one. This new slide that I just added, automatic, it's not something I want, because again, that's a place where students will have access to skip over things, and it's going to put a preview and an X button in my player, and I don't want those. So honestly, the easiest way to get rid of all of them is just kind of let this persist until you're done adding slides, and then you're just going to click on any slide in the scene. Again, I'm a PC user, so Control A is to select everything, or you can hold the Shift and keep clicking all of these slides. And then once you have a whole scene's worth of slides, you can come over here and click and turn them all off. If half of the slides are turned on and half of them are not, you'll end up, let's see, if I turn this one on and I click and turn these back, highlight all here, over here. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to do. Let's see if I do it with this one. Sometimes you get a little square. I want to see if I can get that to show up. So that's interesting. It does not want me to demonstrate that for you. So here we go. So when I've clicked them one at a time, it's going to let me do this. So this just means that half of the slides have it turned on and half the slides don't, or at least one slide in there has it turned off. So it will toggle back to the end. But again, sometimes you see that little square instead of that check mark. So just kind of the housekeeping stuff as you get towards the end, is you want to remove all of those things so that your navigation is the navigation. So let's jump into a slide and talk about forward, backward. Let's see, all of my video slides also have a read script layer on them. And this was just something I did. This is kind of like a little bit over and beyond in terms of meeting accessibility requirements, because we do have closed captioning with all of our videos, but I did offer for students always the opportunity to read it. So there's this button, that is the read the script button, that offers them that. And if you notice, there's that little X button. So over here, I have a back button. And if we come over to the triggers panel, we can kind of read what each button does. And when I click on this back button, it's going to highlight over here. So it says jump to slide 1.4, welcome slide, when the user clicks. And if I come back over here, I can see, yes, I can confirm one. It should change to jump to this 1.61. And there it is. So jump to 1.6 when the user clicks. Or this last button, this read the script button, which I use the little, since there's no I felt like the little chat bubble was a decent enough icon to indicate like the read script part. So that's why we have that little chat bubble hiding back there. And that one shows the layer. So we're just revealing that. So when we add, let's see here, let's just add a shape quick. we're pretending this is a new button. If I wanted this to go somewhere, we're going to add a trigger to it. And here's where we can make those changes. Do I want to jump to a slide? Do I want to show a layer? Do I want to hide a layer? And ultimately, where I use hide a layer is on this one. So when I have a student who chooses this X button, we're going to hide the layer. It's going to hide this current layer, and it's going to then reveal back to this basic slide, or the base slide in that space. So I hope that all makes sense. So it is, you know, what does each button do? Where does it take me? Where do I want to go back to? Ultimately, like, I think all of my video slides are almost all identical in terms of that. They all have a read script that's going to take me to this layer. Every layer has a close this layer thing. Now, the nice thing about this button having just a hide this layer piece of information attached to is I can copy this button now and bring it to another page, and that trigger is going to come along with it. So if you're just getting to the point of starting to do buttons, like, you can put a trigger on something, and then when you copy and paste that element, that information comes along as well. Or if you do want to play with states with something like this, go ahead and build all of that stuff. And then when you bring that element to another place, you're going to copy, paste, and bring all of that along. So I think that's a good place to stop with that, because I think 98% of navigation is kind of like, I'm going from here to there. So let's talk about, like, I have one slide in number 2 here, this consent checklist. Let's see, where I have a lot of slide layers here. I want students to go through all of these little things. So instead of building each of these as a separate slide, which does take some time to do that, I just created all of these different layers. So this next button is not going to take me to the next slide. It's actually going to show me the layer clear, which is going to be, okay, so now we've like really highlighted into all of this. And so I was able to build these slides pretty fast, all of these layers, because I could just copy it. I could just refer back to this one. I could grab like the one little chunk that I wanted, which is this is clear button, or in the next case, the next slide is not coerced. I can just grab that element, I can copy, I can paste it, I can bring it to the next thing. I can bring the back and the next buttons along with me, and then all I have to do is adjust the triggers, and I can get all that information. You know, you can build these slides pretty quick. So from is clear, if we look at where the back button is going to do, the back button is going to hide the layer and bring us back to the base layer. The next button is going to show us the layer is not coerced. And this is, again, this is one of those places where naming things is going to make your life so much easier. Like, you're going to get to this point where you're like, like, now I got to stop and name all these things. And then there's that cognitive, like, I don't know, like the bandwidth starts to lower, because now you got to stop and name everything before you do the navigation. So I like to chunk out like my work. So like, I might just have a day where I'm just going to go in and name elements. I'm just going to go slide to slide and be like, oh, I forgot to name these elements. Let me go fix that. Oh, I didn't name any of these layers. Let me double check and just click slide to slide to slide. And again, I tend to be, I think, in my own daily life, pretty cognizant of like, where's my brain going to let me function today? And there are certainly those lower energy days, and I take advantage of those kinds of spaces to do some of these checklist task kinds of jobs. So as I click through these layers, and I have them in order as they go through, and then I can kind of say, okay, it goes back to is clear, goes forward to is active, is not coerced, initiating person. And so I can just kind of double check that all of my navigation is there. Now, when I get to this last layer, I'll finally get the next button that jumps me to the next slide. But from a student perspective, the content is just smooth. So I look at layers as an opportunity to group like information. And I also think of it from the perspective of like down the road, like if SUNY changes the definitions of these things, I really only have to focus in on this one slide. All of the things I would need to fix are all right here. So there's that way of looking at it too, is like, what's the grouped like information that just makes sense to keep all in one place. Let's see, so that talks about that. So let's come back out to story view. Let's come back out to this untitled slide that is just going to hang out, and let's talk about inserting a little bit of sound. So up here on our insert ribbon, last week we talked about inserting video, and we looked at all these different possibilities. We can also do this. We can insert from all these different places. So an audio file, so somebody has sent you a clip, or we can record mic. I'm curious what will happen because my mic's already being used by Zoom. And then this is my record button, it will give me a countdown. So this is a test of what happens when you use your microphone in 2 programs at the same time. I click save. And now I have this nice little icon down here that lets me know that I have an audio chunk on this slide. I have it represented now down here in the timeline, and I have this new ribbon tool of options. And you'll notice that a lot of these are really very similar to the video one. So we can add captions, and we can bring that down here. And I think, Lisa, is that showing up for you? I remember last time this didn't happen.
No, I don't see that.
Okay, so let me.
Okay. I think it's there now. Down on the bottom, right?
Are you seeing a waveform?
Yes.
Okay. So this is, and I can blow this up and we can see, here's all these little sentences that I said, and it's ready to go with a caption. So I can't remember. I think this is the test. This is probably my first. Looks like that. This is a test. Some consonants have that much stronger part there. So we can add captions there.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, I didn't see it, but then you just hovered your mouse and I could see where you put in this is a test.
Interesting. All right. Let me go back there. Let's see if we can capture it again. So I have a new window that says closed captions editor, and I'm circling those letters with my mouse.
I don't believe I.
Okay. Here it is. Now we got it. I can see the little green line.
Yep.
So here's my waveform of that little, brief little blurb I said. I can increase the size of it so I can see. So this is a test. Come on back here. So this is a test. And so that allows, the nice thing is it'll kind of keep looping around so you have your opportunity to catch what's there. So if you've recorded something without a script, it just takes a little bit longer to go through, but that's what we're dealing with. And so that's kind of a little bit of a review of what we did last week, but this closed captioning editor works the same as the video closed captioning editor. So I'm going to save and close that. And let's see, now I'm going to go back to articulate. It gave me this very nasty warning that a window I was sharing was closed. And if I wanted to actually see the closed captioning, I'd have to go into preview mode at this point. But those are all the basic things. I'm trying to think, I forgot to double check and look at where this shows up. And I think it's actually maybe I think at some point we actually changed this out for video, but what we had was I had 4 paragraphs of text, or kind of 4 bullet points of text. And so what I was able to do is when I was in that audio scene, I could change out there was a rectangle. It was either white around the text, or it was white with like a highlight around it, so that I could toggle that highlight on and off. So when the text was being read that was in that box stood out. And so those are the little fun things that you can do to bring, it's a little bit different. I might be like a little biased towards the fact that I think everything I've presented is awesome and interesting and super important to pay attention to, but ideally, like, we can change up how we're presenting the content and hopefully get students connected in a different way. So I think those are the things I wanted to talk about from an audio perspective. It's not something I use a lot, but I do see where it would be practical in other applications. And maybe we'll have to do like at some point, like when you're all like playing around with Articulate, we can maybe add an extra webinar and I can show off some of the other things that I've built, because I think there are some fun things to do in here. So I'm going to come back out to story view. I'm going to click a couple of slides. Let's see, I'm going to get rid of this one and this one and this one and this one. So let's look at a couple. So to get lots of slides open, you have to keep coming back to story view, double clicking, and then you'll get those slides to all open up like browser tabs. So here I have a couple of different slides that are all people. They all have a title. They all have this box. They all have this read script button. So a lot of times when I'm copying and pasting and building stuff pretty quickly, I'm just getting stuff in there. I want to make sure all my stuff's there. And then, like you said, towards the end, you want to go back there and be like, okay, is everything in exactly the right place? And clearly this version has had that. So like the faces are moving around, but if you like focus just on this read script button as I click through, that holds steady through the whole thing. Like it stays in the rock solid same place. And so how do we make that happen? Because odds are good, like our fine motor skills are not as attuned. And there's some combination between really great fine motor skills and mouse glitches and, you know, just the humanity and working with computers not always being a perfect match. So how do we get in there and really get in there and make things work? So I'm coming over here to this view tab, and there are all these choices that are right here. So if I turn on the ruler, I'm provided with this little space, which actually helps me measure. It's interesting because they set the ruler, and this is not something that I've found that you can change. When I work in Photoshop, I almost always put my ruler up here so that this is the 0 point, but we get this 0 point in the middle. So this is helpful to some extent. I have not found it to be a terribly great tool in this program versus where I've used rulers and other programs, or like, I think like where you add tabs in Microsoft Word. I think rulers are really practical in those spaces. So I'm going to turn that one off. I've just not really found a lot of use for that. The grid lines I think are helpful to some extent. You can see how I've used it down here because this rectangle is like right on that dotted line there. I also find this really an impractical tool. I don't know, I don't know. I struggle to really focus on it. It makes it really hard to look at in my mind. But again, if this is something that works for you, that's great. Or I know sometimes people like to use grids in terms of how they lay stuff out and it helps them guide initially. So I think that's, you know, what works for you is what works for you. And so I just honor everybody's like thinking process. So I want to make sure that you know about these so you can check them all out. I'm going to turn off those. I do use guides a lot. Guides are something I use a lot in the Adobe programs. The nice thing in an Adobe program is you can have as many horizontal guides as you want and as many physical guides as you want. And Articulate limits you to one. So it looks like, and if I come up here, I can just grab this guide and I can move it this way or this way. So like maybe I might want to use this guide to square up the edge of this video. So I'm going to put that one there. I'm going to click there. I'm going to capture that right there. And you can see along this horizontal guide, I also have my little set of words here. So that also is exactly in that same space. And those are the kinds of things that our human eye is very super aware of. Like if it's not quite exactly lined up, our brains do pay attention to that. I think that's one of the interesting things of working with fonts. So if I zoom in here a little bit, you know, it's a little bit off, but it's almost like the underline of that text there. And I'm going to ignore what they forget. There's a special font word for the things that hang below the line. So we're not going to worry about those parts, but what's the major horizontal line that's available in that text? I'm going to zoom back out. So if you'll notice when these guides are here, like that's a great way to like line up. Well, so here's a different type layout slide. I shouldn't have picked that one, but here's this one. So again, that slide works. This slide works. It's glitching up on me and not totally loading, but let's see, let's look at that one. And I can just kind of click through these slides and confirm that they're all right in that same spot. The text lines up. So that's a good way to, you know, quickly go through. And so it is one of those things like I'll get the guides into place and maybe I'll just run back buttons. Like this is a great way now where I can get all my videos lined up. And then maybe what I'll do, I'll get through the end of the module and then I'll be like, all right, now I'm going to run my next buttons. I'm going to move my guides. It's a little under, but let's see. Does my next button hold true? Yes, it does. So there's that way of lining stuff up, which is a little bit more physical. The other way to do it, which is like the super, super detailed way is if I right click this next button, I can get this size and position thing. And so size is the actual physical size of my next button. And scale is, if I want it, it's actually 13% of the original art file. But if we're going to come over here to position, this tells me where I am on the slide physically. Now, the one thing I would say, I think it would be more practical for me to have my 0 mark down here. I think it's just, I don't know if it's too much. I had a really great math teacher in high school. So I just really remember doing XY stuff. And so in my mind, this is the 0 point for XY reasons. But from a layout perspective, this is actually your 0 line up here is this top left corner. You can also set it to be in the center. I do better personally with just having kind of this absolute reference point, but I think what ends up being a little awkward about this, and Lisa, I should probably confirm that you can see the size and position box.
Yes, we can see
Okay,
that now.
good.
I think it just
It's
popped up.
interesting how some windows, yeah, it is kind of neat how like some show up and some don't. So I'm going to let it sit up here. And if I go to the next slide and click on the next button. So this next button is set up at 568 and 470. And I would probably just write that down on a scrap of piece of paper, which is what I'm going to do right now because I have a notebook in front of me, 568, 470, because I'm not going to remember that in my brain. I click that next button, yep, 568, 470. So if this was like in the wrong spot by a few things, now I have that and I don't even have to look where it is. I can just click on it. And it needs to be at 470. I'm going to put it there. So this is like the one place where I think it's a little like counterintuitive. I don't know, it reminds me of like working with a microscope because higher numbers move it lower down the page as opposed to up the page, but that might just be my own like brain logic like causing me issues. So, you know, just I'm putting it out there in case your brain logic runs the same as my brain logic. So again, these are the things that you want to do towards the end, but it will take some time. So you want to ensure that you do have that figured into the planning process. So once you have a next button on every page, then go through and make sure they're all in the same place. You know, once you have your back buttons and do all the same thing. And like I said, I do tend to work on slides that are similar in format at the same time. So you won't necessarily work on your slides in order, but when I had my videos ready to go in, then I got all the video slide stuff done because just kind of once you're playing in there and you're adding videos, sometimes things will get mucked up. So once it's all in there, you can get in there and fine tooth all of that stuff out. The other thing I would say with the size and position thing, let me bring that back up, is the size thing too. Like you can play around with fine tuning the size of things. So in this case, the width is 13% and I shrunk it from the original file that I brought in. This lock aspect ratio would mean that if I increase it over here to make it a larger size item, then it's going to stay. Every time I increase the width, it's also going to increase the height. So I don't have like the long skinny button. Let's get that back to 13% because that's where it started. And I think those are all the things I want to talk about from a size and position. So let's just revisit. The last thing I wanted to talk about was slide timeline adjustments. So in this case where I have these slides that are video driven, let's pull this up so we can see this. So as I'm looking at this, here's my video that's playing. And you might have noticed up here that it looks like there's 2 text boxes lying on top of each other here. And that's purposeful because one of them is going to play for the first 10 seconds and then it's going to disappear. And then the next text box is going to show up at the 10-second mark. So I can highlight parts of the video at that point. So I'm guessing that my video must be about 39 seconds because you can also see at this point that my next button is only going to show up about 2 seconds before the end of that slide. So my mind is in the timeline on a video slide is you're not going to have that next button show up until the end. The other thing that you might want to consider doing as you're going into the like the testing phase is that you might actually want all of your next buttons to exist through the whole thing, because if you need to test things, it's going to slow you down in terms of, like, if you have to wait for every 30-second video to play to test the whole module, now you've added minutes to your life of waiting for this thing to play through. So like, I'm getting ready to revamp for my fall 2020 deployment. So probably what I will do.
You are frozen.
Okay.
I will text her and let her know. Hold tight.
Am I unfrozen yet?
Okay, sorry for the glitch. Oh,
that's okay. Am I back?
I think you're back now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. I was able to hear you say I was frozen, but I look normal. So help me figure out where we left off. I was talking about timeline stuff, and I was talking about these 2 text boxes that are timed.
The last thing I remember, you were talking about setting a next button on every slide, so you don't lose hours in your day.
Okay, cool. That helps. So let me show you what that would look like. So right now, these next buttons are only going to show up for the last 2 seconds. If I right click that, and again, I'm sorry, I'm not a Mac user, so I'm guessing that there's a Mac parallel to right click. I'm going to click this little timing thing. And here I can see that the start time is 37 seconds. So if I change that to 0, it'll now show for the whole thing. So as I'm getting ready to revamp this for my fall 2020 deployment, and this is actually the file that I've started working on, you may have noticed there's some different graphics in the background, is I'm going to go through on all my video slides and make those next buttons the whole length. So that way, when I need to preview and make sure everything's working, I can click through those in rapid succession. I'll tab order and make sure everything's right, and then I'm going to go right on to the next one. And then before I'm ready to publish, I'll go back through the step and make those next buttons really short again. And what I can do is I can go back to this. I right clicked it. I went back to that timing. The start time, I think, was like, I don't know, maybe it was 27 seconds. But let's see, there it is. No, it wasn't. But I can also drag this so that it's, roughly about that. So, it might seem like an extra step, but to me, like, the time to make all my next buttons, the whole slide, or at least the ones that are on the video slides, because those are really where the lengthier places are, it's kind of a good trade-off in time to just fix those at the end. So let me go to a slide that's, let's see, let me come back out here, like a slide that's maybe all text. This is a good one. So in this case, sometimes you'll just drop content on, and Articulate will just decide that it's 90 minutes, or not 90 minutes, but like 90 seconds worth of content. You end up with a really long slide. So you can grab this end bar here, and you can just drag and drop this. So in this case, this next button is available the whole time. So maybe I want this to be a 10-second slide, and I want the next button to be over here, not till the end. So you can do all of that. I've, for the most part, made it so that most slides are 5 seconds. I think there are some algorithms about, like, if I know how long the text is on this page, I can have it calculate how long it takes the average reader to read that. Sometimes I'll just time myself reading it and just use that as kind of a guidance and how long something should be. What's interesting is sometimes students would be like, the next button doesn't show forever. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because the next button is designed to like anticipate how long it takes to actually read it. And then they generally don't, like, it's one of those places where you can kind of push back and be like, I don't think you're reading the content, but without really saying that. So it is a way to get some feedback back from students. And you kind of can figure out who's reading and who's not reading. So I think, oh, this is interesting. My title text is not showing for the whole thing. It looks like that one got backwards from the next button. Excellent. So like I said, there's always a mistake that you will find later on to correct. And I think those are all the things I wanted to cover in this week. Oh, previewing. So let's talk about previewing, because that really is like the thing. So like a slide that is really just, one little chunk of stuff, a little bit of reading. It's going to go to the next slide when they're finished reading it. I don't really worry about previewing that slide specifically. And even a slide that's just one video, I probably won't bother to review as a separate thing. But like, let's see, let me go back. That big consent one that we were looking at before, where we have all of these layers, it would make sense to come out here and preview this particular slide, because it's going to preview the slide and all those layers. And that's a lot of triggers that we want to make sure happen. So I'm going to start out my previewing with, let me start with the most complicated slides and just preview those as standalone things. There, as you may have noticed in some of the earlier, and actually I can run this while I'm talking, is that it takes a little while for it to generate this preview. So giving it, if you preview like the whole scene in one go, odds are good I feel like every time I preview, like there's 5 to 10 mistakes. And if it's, slide 6, 7, and 13, well, then you have to go through 6. You get to slide 6 and you realize you made a mistake, and now you got to go start over again. Now this time you get to 7 and oops, you got to go out and start over again. So again, in terms of like being time efficient, it just makes sense to like come out here and be like, all right, do all of these triggers. So that's interesting. Like, oop, that next button seemed like it was a little bit slow. Or these are the places where maybe we do let students click through. But it looks like they're showing up pretty consistently 2 or 3 seconds in. And what'll happen now is I'll click this next one. The next slide isn't available because we only previewed this one slide. And it'll give me that message. I can replay a preview and it'll reset it back. Or I can close the preview and I'm back out. And so I can fix whatever I need to fix. Maybe I just do want all of these next buttons to be showing up a little bit sooner. I can come back and move that. I can test that. I can really make sure this complex slide is ready to go. And then my next round would be, let's preview a scene. And again, these are sometimes things that I do find like the days when you're like in and out of your office and you're like back and forth to meetings, like these are things that you can kind of like weave into your day. Like I might come in and hit, send it, boot up, turn it on, hit, preview this whole scene, and then I'll go get my coffee. So I'm making, like that couple minutes that your computer's got to like chunk away at like creating this scene is there, and then you can kind of come back. I mean, odds are good you're not really needing to preview the sound of a video. You just want to make sure that all of your navigation works. It's smart to tab and return your way through those things because you can double check that. So if we go back to this, preview this slide, and I can actually show you what that looks like. Articulate just released some new stuff. And so I'm going to what I'm doing here is hitting tab and return. And you'll see that this little yellow box is entered. And this is actually a new thing. I've never seen this before. Skip navigation, press enter to return to the slide. So
I don't think,
the fact that this is,
I don't know if we're seeing what you were just seeing.
Interesting. Do you see a little yellow oval?
I can see that now.
Okay.
It just needed to be brought up a little bit.
All right, cool. I wonder if I just need to slow down and let my internet keep up with me. So that's actually a new thing, but so it's on the player, and there is a little bit more control. The update that they just released last week, I'm getting the message that my internet connection is unstable. Am I frozen?
You were a little laggy, but you're back now.
Okay. So once I start hitting, oh, now I'm in Zoom. So tab ordering is working in Zoom land and not in Articulate land. So this yellow rectangle part, like you can change the color of that now, which I was like, I don't know if that was a thing I was thrilled to change, but I think I'm going to change it this year because I can. So this is the highlight is around that next button. When I hit enter, it's going to cause that trigger to happen. So skip navigation thing. I really don't even know what it means. I skimmed the article, but I'm gonna have to go back through and see how this actually works. And I think there are a few more settings that we can do. So I'll have to do some homework and report back about some of these updated tab order stuff. But there's a few more screen readers that this is designed to work with now. And I haven't had a chance to test any of that yet, but I think this is really good news. There has been some complaint within the community that uses screen readers that articulate create stuff that is difficult to get through. I haven't had that feedback back from my own students. But I think that fact that Articulate has heard that and is responding to that is really good news for all of us. Oh, I think this is what it is. So when I'm tab ordering here, so I'm going to go to next. When I hit here, it says it's going to let me skip the navigation. So I think that means it's going to let me skip. Oh, you can't see what I'm pointing at. Oh no, it's letting me skip. So it's not going through the menu. It's not going through the volume every time I go through a slide. It's letting me just go to the next slide without having to tab order through all of the pieces of the player that could be tab order identified. And that is really a huge, huge boost for students who rely on that. So a lot of times I just use tab and return when I'm in preview mode, because then I kind of get like two previews for the time of one, and you know, that way you can test your tab order stuff at the same time you're testing that all of your navigation stuff is in there. So if I was let's see, let me do another one, like those video slides, like this will be interesting because I don't want them to play. Let's see what happens. Oh, we are getting close on time.
On your screen is a...
So I paused that so it wouldn't keep playing. But if I tab order in here, so now I'm on the read script button, I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to see the script on that button. If I down, it should let me, let's see, how is it going to let me? So I'm gonna have to double check and see what the tab order is for getting it to advance down through that scroll bar that used to be just the return key. Now that I'm on the X, I can hit enter and now I'm back. So it causes that trigger to go. And because it hasn't played out, I don't have a next button to test, but that next button's not going to go anywhere at this point. So let me close that out. I think those are all of the things I want to talk about today. So there's lots of little, like, I don't know, I guess it's like when you're sifting stuff and you just kind of like, you know, first we started with the rocks and the pebbles, and now we're really getting down to the sand layers of like these really fine mesh things that we have to worry about to make sure that we're really ready to go live. So it is going through the slides over and over and over again. And I do find it to be tedious. So knowing how to spread it out and really just kind of focusing on one thing at a time does seem to help with that. So it's like every day going in with a different mission of like, today's the next buttons, tomorrow's, you know, the next thing. So that's just how you get through. So I'm going to close that share. If somebody has a question, I can go back to that. It looks like there's a couple of things in the chat. Oh, it's all about that stuff. I'm going to mute myself for 1 second because I have my colleague here asking me a question, but then I will be available for questions from you all.
And feel free when she comes back, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can send a message in the chat and we'll relay it. So now's your chance.
And if your request is for me to make Annie shells and cheese at 6:30, I've already got that one on my calendar.
Just a reminder that all of the recordings will also be available on the SPARC, on the password protected website. I think weeks 1 through 4 are currently available, and we'll be getting the other weeks. Are we in week 7 now?
This is 8, but I don't think I've uploaded 7 yet. I was just thinking like, I don't think I got there yet. So maybe I'll do 7 and 8 tonight.
We'll get them all up there, and so you can use them as a reference or rewatch as well.
Yeah. And they do live on a YouTube channel called SPARC Tech Academy. So if you're like itching to get your fingers in it a little sooner, you could find them there too. And hi, Julia. I'm going to just put it on camera. I saw you this week. I guess we can go ahead and stop the recording, Lisa. Like I said, I'll hang for a second. If anybody's got any questions, I'll put my email in the message bar again. I've gotten some really nice emails from folks who participated, and that I really enjoy that.